Good. Well, welcome to each and every one to this, the Pitt Lecture, sponsored by the Berkeley Divinity School at Yale. I want to tell you a little bit about the lectureship itself and then introduce today's speaker. I'm Joseph Britton, the Dean of the school, and it's our pleasure always to welcome folks every 2 years to this lecture. It alternates with the Cheney Lecture that's given in other years. But the Pitt Lectureship itself was established at Berkeley Divinity School to honor Louis Weatherby Pitt, who lived from 1893 until 1959. Louis Pitt was a distinguished alumnus and trustee of the school and was known as a wise and loving pastor who was deeply concerned for two things in particular. One was the art of preaching, and secondly, for a worldwide vision for Christianity. Because of these concerns, his family graciously established the Louis Weatherby Pitt Memorial Fund to provide for lectures by distinguished preachers and rural Christians. And today we have someone who represents both of those categories. And then the fund was augmented in 1989 as a memorial also to Blanche Parmalee Pitt, who died in 1987 and was Dr. Pitt's beloved wife. We're saddened today by the fact that Louis Pitt, who is a son of Louis Weatherby Pitt, is unable to be with us. And it's particularly disappointing because he has for a number of years been after us to invite Bishop Mwamba to be here because they are close friends from their mutual connections in Africa and have many ties between their families. And so our thoughts are with Louis, who is ill today. But some of his family members, we believe, are here. Polly Whiteside and Chris Pitt and Nancy Sand. Are you all here? Have they made it? Where are you? There you are. Stand up and be recognized. Yes. So please give our regards to Louis and tell him it was a great occasion and his presence was sorely missed. We're also pleased today to have a number of the members of Bishop Mwamba's family who are seated here as he was sharing a little bit about each of you all. I think we could confer an honorary doctorate on each and every one of you. You're a very distinguished lot, so we may see more of the Mwamba family here in future years. But welcome to each of you. It's a delight to have you here with your friend and brother. Shall we say welcome? Now, the Pitt Lectureship over the years has brought a distinguished list of speakers since Theodore Parker Ferris gave the first lecture back in 1961. Some names you may recognize are Stephen Bain, Charles Price, Rowan Williams, in those days Professor Williams, now Archbishop Williams, Mark Dyer, Catherine Tanner, Robin Eames, and most recently Jane Williams was here 2 years ago. So it's a great pleasure to welcome today the 20th Pitt Lecture, Trevor Mwamba, who is the Bishop of Botswana. Born in Zambia, he studied for the priesthood at St. Stephen's House in Oxford and was ordained in 1985 and has served as bishop of his diocese since 2005. In this time, he involved in the life of his city, country, and province, and in the wider Anglican communion. He has preached and lectured in England and the United States and published a refreshing book entitled Dancing Sermons. And in a conversation with students yesterday, we were hearing from him about how in these times of uncertainty in the Anglican communion in his diocese and country, the church is focused primarily upon its mission, upon meeting the challenges of the HIV/AIDS crisis, of caring for orphans who are left parentless by that crisis, of training clergy for the many remote rural parishes. And so we salute the focus on mission that his leadership has represented in that place. So we're pleased to welcome Bishop Mwamba and the members of his family and the Pitt family as well to Berkeley and Yale Divinity Schools today. And we look forward to hearing his lecture on the theme, God of Wonder, Grace, and Surprises. Please welcome Bishop Trevor Mwamba.
Thank you very much, President and Dean. Berkeley Divinity School at Yale. Looking at you, I'm in two minds because you are a cross between a wise version of Tony Curtis and the mischievous eye now a twinkle reminds me of Einstein, but anyway, more of that. The very Reverend Joseph Britton, trustees, the Pitt family, alumni, faculty, and students, ladies and gentlemen, let me begin by expressing my very deep appreciation for the honor that Berkeley Divinity School has conferred on me to deliver the Louis Weatherby Pitt Lecture for 2009 and to receive an honorary doctorate. 47 years ago, President John F. Kennedy came to Yale to deliver the commencement address and to receive an honorary doctorate. He remarked wittingly, "It might be said now that I have the best of both worlds, a Harvard education and a Yale degree." I echo his sentiments and only move a slight amendment that we change Harvard to Oxford. Not Oxford in Mississippi, but Oxford in England. President Kennedy went on to say that he was particularly glad to become a Yale man because as he thought about his troubles, he found that a lot of them came from other Yale men. Now, I don't have that trouble. My trouble is other bishops. Oh, yes. I am, by divine permission, the Bishop of Botswana in Southern Africa, and which has been described as an African success story because of its working democracy as well as its economic prosperity. However, for many of you, I am very sure that Botswana is famous for Ma Ramotswe, the heroine of the best-selling series of books, The #1 Ladies Detective Agency, by my friend Alexander McCall Smith. Ma Ramotswe, you will be very, very delighted to hear, is actually an Episcopalian. Oh, yeah. In the book, in the company of cheerful ladies, she attends a service at the Cathedral of the Holy Cross in Gaborone, which is the capital of Botswana. As I am preaching, Ma Ramotswe is not concentrating on the sermon, as her mind is wondering on how to solve a case involving a pumpkin. She stops herself and thinks, this is not the way to listen to Trevor Mwamba. I hope that your minds are clear of pumpkins or whatever you had for dessert, as I invite you to join me in proposing a toast to God for the gift of this very memorable moment. I thank God for my family, immediate and extended. In Africa, families are very large, so I didn't want to include everybody, so you'll forgive me, so I'll just name a few. For their love and support, I think of my parents, my father, Simon, and my late mother, Mildred, for their integrity and prayers, my in-laws, Kitamiri and Gladys, for their leadership and humility. I think now especially of my wife, Masakoa, a beautiful, sophisticated, and wise woman. I think of our twin daughters, Sineo and Lukwesa, whose gracious manners and intelligence always humbles me. I think of our son, Enu, a born leader. He turns 18 years old in 3 days. I once picked him up from school when he was 9 years old. And as we drove home, I asked him what they had done at school that day. He said the teacher had given them a task to write about famous men and women. So I asked him, who he had written about. He said that he had written about himself, but he did not have all the information yet. I thank God for each of you present, old and new friends. You are all very special and a wonder of God. Your presence here enriches me very much, and I know this very, very moment. Accordingly, my toast to God is for the gift of moments, for the gift of family, for the gift of you, for the greatness and the power and the glory and the victory and the majesty, for all that is in the heaven and earth is God's. God be praised, who is the blessing within and beyond all our gifts in life. Now, there is another toast I seek to draw your attention to. C.S. Lewis, over 60 years ago, wrote a masterpiece of satire entitled The Screwtape Letters. Screwtape is a crafty old devil writing letters to his nephew, Wormwood, instructing him how to tempt people away from God. Shortly before he died, on November the 22nd, 1963, Lewis compiled a selection of short essays, which were later published in a book entitled Screwtape Proposes a Toast and Other Pieces. It is the toast that interests us. The setting is in hell at the annual dinner of the Tempters Training College for Young Devils. Screwtape is the guest of honor. He responds to a toast just proposed to the health of the guests by the principal, Dr. Slabgob. Screwtape's message to the graduates about to be posted to official tempterships on earth is on the destruction of individuals. Deviously, he explains that by cultivating a state of mind in people which excludes humility, which excludes love, which excludes contentment, and all the pleasures of gratitude or admiration, turns a person away from every road which might finally lead one to heaven. Surprisingly, I recently stumbled across another Screwtape toast, an essay by David Virtue written 2 years ago, entitled Screwtape Proposes an Episcopal Toast. To my amazement, I found myself mentioned in the toast. Screwtape begins, "My dear Wormwood, the day fast approacheth, and the night is already here. It is night and darkness in the Episcopal Church. It is important that it stays that way. The Council of Hades was especially gleeful at the announcement that a lesbian living in a committed relationship is on the slate to be the next bishop of the Episcopal Diocese of Chicago. You must move all hell to see that she wins. The timing of her nomination could not have been better. Right in the middle of those dreadful consecrations in Africa, which unnerved, albeit briefly, our father, who is doing his best to undermine those African archbishops. He has sent Agent Slabgob to work on that Bishop Mwamba fellow in Botswana. What a find he has turned out to be. Slabgob is working hard to see that he becomes the next Archbishop of Central Africa. If he does, the province will be ours. Work on fear, greed, and power. Screwtape waxes eloquent. Those Episcopalians and Anglicans truly love power. A purple shirt, that's why I'm wearing black. A purple shirt. A purple shirt works much in our favor. It gives men feelings of superiority they have never had before. The final subversion of the Episcopal House of Bishops is at hand, Wormwood. It will be a moment of triumph for our Father and the Council that has worked so hard to undermine it all. 40 years of steady erosion. Now we come down the last few yards. A final push is in order. Allow Mrs. Scory to hand the ball to Dr. Williams, who will run it up the gut for a touchdown and celebrate like Chris Johnson. That's right. It will be the final nail in the coffin for the Anglican communion. This is the tale of two toasts. The first toast to God, hereinafter referred to as the Holy Toast, is in a spirit of gratitude and awareness of his many blessings and goodness to us. The second toast, hereinafter referred to as the diabolical toast, excludes God and empties life of all that is admirable. The tale of two toasts is how thinking and perception shape us. When Screwtape counsels cultivating a state of mind in people, he is advocating thinking that consciously, deliberately, and actively snubs faith, hope, and love. With this attitude, all roads lead to hell. The way we think is how we see things. How well one sees depends on so many things, says a character in Pascal Messia's book, Night Train to Lisbon. The poet William Blake said, "A fool sees not the same tree that a wise man sees." How we think also depends on many things. Of those many things, we should nurture, above all, the gift of truth. Truth ennobles one, makes one a better person. We speak of ennobling truth in a qualitative sense, the quality or character of something as goodness, integrity, beauty. The Czech playwright and later president Václav Havel, in his essays entitled Living in Truth, illustrates it very well in writing of the defeat of totalitarian oppression by human beings who refuse to live within the lie and choose courageously to live in truth. He says the essential aims of life are present naturally in every person. In everyone, there is some longing for humanity's rightful dignity, for moral integrity, for free expression of being and a sense of transcendence over the world of existence, the desire to be in touch with what is true and to live by it in all its consequences is deeply embedded in human beings. We cannot live falsely for long. Truth has a radiant power that cannot be quenched. A culture that denies God for long will find that the desire for God will break through powerfully because we cannot live for long within the lie. The Holy Toast reflects thinking and living truthfully. It ennobles one by cultivating the practice of the presence of God. God is truth, to be lived in every facet of our life. In the prayer of Brother Lawrence, we experience the Lord of all pots and pans and things. To appreciate the art of the practice of the presence of God, we must first be cognizant of that thinking that gives rise to the diabolical toast, or living within the lie. Alexander Solzhenitsyn, the great Russian writer and modern prophet, was aware of this when he pointed to lack of spirituality as the fundamental crisis of our modern age. In 1983, he received the Templeton Prize for Progress in Religion in London. Solzhenitsyn delivered an address entitled, "Men Have Forgotten God." He said, "Over half a century ago, while I was still a child, I recall hearing a number of older people offer the following explanation for the great disasters that had befallen Russia. We have forgotten God. That is why all this has happened." Since then, I have spent well nigh 50 years working on the history of our revolution. In the process, I have read numbers of books, collected hundreds of personal testimonies, and have already contributed 8 volumes of my own toward the effort of clearing away the rubble left by the upheaval. But if I were asked today to formulate as concisely as possible the main cause of the ruinous revolution that swallowed up over 60 million of our people, I could not put it more accurately than to repeat, men have forgotten God. That is why all this has happened. Solzhenitsyn was right, and the ancient prophets would agree. In the words of Francis Thompson's poem, The Hound of Heaven, all things betray thee who betrayest me. People had forgotten God for what Solzhenitsyn termed anthropocentricity, man at the center of everything in life, free from God. Solzhenitsyn traced the root to the mistake of human thinking in the past centuries, epitomized by René Descartes, who split the conscious self from all objects external to it and reduced the world to that which is measurable, calculable, and controllable. This rationalistic humanistic autonomy became the basis for government and social science. Truman Morrison points out in his article, Spirituality and the Crisis of the West, that although Descartes' model of knowledge has enhanced the scientific and technological enterprise, this Cartesian model of thought has radically impoverished the world in terms of its qualitative dimensions of moral purpose and spiritual meaning. The diabolical toast is a product of a mindset opposed to God, without the spiritual space for wonder, grace, and surprises, but crammed with false values that ultimately dehumanize one. Solzhenitsyn recognized that secularism was not the answer to our problems. It was the problem. It gave rise to atheistic Soviet tyranny and a spiritually bankrupt Western world. Remember Woody Allen's My Speech to the Graduates, in which he says, more than any other time in history, mankind faces a crossroads. One path leads to despair and utter hopelessness, the other to total extinction. Let us pray that we have the wisdom to choose correctly. This is the choice that secularism offers us. The complex issues of our world can be reduced to one word: spiritual. Life is ultimately spiritual. God is the one thing needful, the holy energy alive at the center of creation. If we slip off this base, then things fall apart. The center cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. God is wholeness. What really matters in life is our wholeness and friendship with God. The American philosopher William Barrett would say how to let prayer re-enter the world of Samuel Beckett, which is where modernity finally leads us. Samuel Beckett's world is reflected in the characters of his play, Waiting for Godard, and it is devoid of a compelling sense of holy. It is defined and determined ultimately by our transitory experience, where the spiritual presence of the divine is apparent by its absence. I was born in a provincial town of Mansa in northern Rhodesia, then a British colony, which after independence became Zambia. When I was born, the British Empire covered the globe. It was said that the sun never set on the British Empire, as it was setting in some far-flung corner of the empire. It was rising in another corner. Some astute observer posed the question, why did the sun never set on the British Empire? And answered, because God did not trust the British in the dark. The only exemption to the general rule on that is Dean Willis. Mansa to Yale has been a wondrous journey, inspired by an enthusiasm to understand God truly, and Anglicanism. In this lecture, The God of Wonder, Grace, and Surprises, I suggest how we can reclaim our wholeness and friendship with God. We begin with wonder. Plato once said, all thought begins in wonder. This reminds me of Einstein, desire to know God's thoughts. In his life, Einstein did not doubt the importance of what he called the super-personal objects and goals, which neither require nor are capable of rational foundation. He cultivated and retained throughout his life unabated wonder at the immensity, unity, rational harmony, and mathematical beauty of the universe. He said, every one of us appears here on earth involuntarily and uninvited for a short stay, without knowing the whys and whereofs. The most beautiful and deepest experience a person can have is the sense of the mysterious. It is the underlying principle of religion, as well as all serious endeavors in art and science. He who has never had this experience seems to me, if not dead, at least blind. To sense that behind everything that can be experienced, there is something that our mind cannot grasp, and whose beauty and sublimity reaches us only indirectly, and is a feeble reflection, that is religiousness. To me, it suffices to wonder at these secrets and to attempt humbly to grasp with my mere mind an image of the lofty structure of all that is there. Likewise, in his magical book, Internal Echoes, John O'Donoghue says, where there is no wonder, there is little depth of presence. Wonder is a beautiful style of perception. When you wonder at something, your mind voyages deep into its possibility and nature. You do not take it for granted and are not deceived or blinded by its familiarity. The sense of wonder keeps experience fresh and original. When the person you love still causes you to wonder, you are still alive to their mystery. Wonder is the child of mystery. It calls your heart to thanks and praise. The God of wonder wonders over us, voyaging deep into our being and possibilities. God wanders over the earth without form and void and darkness. And that's what the creation story is about, God wandering. Then one possibility, light, pops up, and God says, "Let there be light," and light comes about. Then God clicked his heels with joy. So too the God of wonder voyages deep into our being and possibilities without form and void and darkness. A little girl was wondering about herself and asked her mother, "Mommy, who made me?" And the mother answered, "God did, my darling." Then the girl asked, "And who made you, Mommy?" And the mother answered, "God did, my darling." The girl asked the final question, "And who made grandmother?" And the mother answered, "God did, my darling." The little girl paused for a moment, thinking, and then said, "God has certainly improved since he made grandmother, hasn't he?" With this awareness, our possibilities are infinitely immense. Never, never belittle yourselves or others. The God of wonder does not only wonder over us, but within us too. 62 years ago, the Reverend Louis Pitt preached an inspiring sermon at the ordination to the priesthood of his son, the Reverend Louis W. Pitt Jr. It was on this text: "We have this treasure in earthen vessels, that the exceeding greatness of the power may be of God and not from us." Let us think of it as divinity encrypted in us. He expounded that the Bible, the creeds, the institutional church, the priesthood are all equally earthen vessels, limited, fragile, human instruments. Their power does not lie in themselves but in God. He added that all humans are earthen vessels too, that the power may be of God and not from us. God gives in a way that is always bringing us back to the giver himself. He concluded, "The earthen vessel is not the precious thing. If it were, death would rule the universe, for death can shatter earthen vessels. But if what the vessels contains, faith and hope and love and wonder and worship and tenderness and courage and service, if these are the precious things, then we are forever safe. For over these things, death hath no power. The spirit eludes capture and will return to God who gave it." What a wonder we are, with divinity encrypted in us. John O'Donoghue was right. The divine artist is utterly creative. Each individual, you and I, expresses and incarnates a different dimension of divinity. Each person walks a unique pathway through the world. We are each a specific revelation of God. The wonder is not just within us, but also beyond us. Arthur Gordon, a Yale and Oxford man, great combination, in his book, A Touch of Wonder, explores this theme. Through a series of inspiring stories, he shares his way of looking at things, simple things that happen to all of us sooner or later. The birth of a child, falling in love, the magic of a sunset, death. The wisdom in the stories is that there is more to these commonplace happenings than meets the casual eye. And most people would find a lot more in them if only they would pause and look and feel and care just a bit more than they do. The poet William Blake did this when he saw a world in a grain of sand and heaven in a wild flower. Wonder enlarges our hearts with compassion and understanding and stirs up in us a sense of holiness, so we can see beyond the surface of a fact, a situation, a person, to the deep roots of things, into their holy ground. I hear Jacob, his voice echoing through the ages. Surely the Lord is in this place, and I knew it not. John Claypool, in his book, God, the Ingenious Alchemist, explains that religious experience is suddenly awakening to the endless graciousness that has always been present. But until then, unperceived. Thomas Merton described it as the breakthrough to the already. So the first step in reclaiming our wholeness and friendship with God is to be open to this wonder in which we dwell. Here we encounter the intelligibility and power beyond mystery, without which mystery itself disappears. We also stumble upon amazing grace, the second step in reclaiming our wholeness and friendship with God. Over a century and 37 years ago, Henry W. Beecher traveled to Yale to deliver the first of the Beecher Lectures on preaching, which had been established in memory of his great father. But Henry was in deep trouble. He was charged with adultery. A trial was pending. Everything he stood for was in danger. His vocation, his reputation, the gospel that he had traveled to Yale to lecture about, it was all tottering on the verge of collapse. The night before the lecture, he did not sleep well. He had no plan for what he was going to say. An hour before the lecture, still empty of ideas, he decided to shave. Looking at himself in the mirror, he clearly saw the state of his life, shame and problems. Then it dawned on him. He dropped his razor, seized his pencil, and wrote out the notes for his lecture. Later, resuming his shaving, he cut himself badly. Henry Beecher realized that whatever he was, a respected and important man, he was still a man of flesh and blood, subject to the frailty, problems, and darkness of this world. It further dawned on him that those who were there to hear him lecture were also flesh and blood. These respectable men and women, touched over with makeup, were humans, and each a total mess. Mother Mary Clare of the Sisters of the Love of God at Oxford once said, "When you go before God in prayer, you cannot leave anything behind. You carry in your heart every person, every incident, every thought, every feeling you have ever had. And as you lay yourself before God, you bring also the mess as well. My prayer, she said, is really one sentence. Here I am. What a mess. We are all a mess. Paul Cludo in his book, Lord, Teach Us to Pray, gives us a glimpse, and we know it, how we live with this mess, how our minds are stuffed full, how long have we been piling inside us, stuffing inside us like soiled linen in a suitcase, one on top of the other. Anyhow, things, people, memories, wishes, impressions, books, talks, successes, failures, humiliations, vices, good deeds, bad deeds. And the worst of it is that they are not dead things. They are all alive, kicking and talking and trying painfully to fit together and attending to orders from outside. We all know too well what happens on sleepless nights, for instance, when the whole lot starts stirring and pushing and screaming at once. What a mess. The ennobling truth that dawned on Bitcher is that God speaks in messed up lives. Let there be grace. Bitcher realized whatever mess he and his listeners were in, the God of grace sees deep to the latent goodness in us, which grace nurtures to bloom. Grace works this way. As we lay ourselves before God, dragging this whole lot, screaming at once, God wanders over each of this screaming lot, voyaging deep into their possibilities, their histories, their being. God then speaks a word of grace, a word of truth, a word of rebuke, a word of healing, a word of discipline, a word of blessing. He speaks the opt word. To the darkness within, God says, let there be light. To the lingering sorrow and sadness that weighs our hearts, God says, let there be joy. To the chaos within, God says, let there be peace. To the doubts, God says, let there be faith. So to each mess, God speaks the cleansing word of hope, of resurrection, of love. As each transformation takes place within us, God kicks his or her heels with joy. This is the grace that dawned on Henry Bitcher over a century and 37 years ago. Grace comes as a surprise, which is the last step in reclaiming our wholeness and friendship with God. So we meet the God of surprises. Martin Smith, an Episcopalian priest, in his article, The Wisdom of Jailed Prophets, says that St. John's letters to the churches written in exile in the Isle of Patmos have at their core the appeal, expect God to surprise us. Jailed prophets specialize in reminding us that God is not merely the God who is, let alone the God who was. God is the one who is to come, the Almighty. Conventional religion looks to the past, but the passion of prophetic religion leans into the future of God. The God who is to come overturns our predictions and confounds plans. Divine innovation sets in play the unforeseen and makes human forecasting look ridiculous. Expect surprise. And let that expectation liberate you from all that oppresses you with a sense that power structures are immovable, custom set in stone, and we are impotent to make an unprecedented future for humanity's well-being. The last presidential elections many thought would be just another election. But surprise, President Obama emerged as this nation's first African-American president. And last week, when the Nobel Peace Prize was announced, according to the Associated Press, it drew gasps of surprise. Our hope is in a God of surprises, of resurrection, and we can awaken again to the fact that the one certainty we have to offer is that God will continually take the world by surprise. Like 3 years ago when Bishop Catherine Jefferts Scory was elected as the first woman presiding bishop or archbishop of the Anglican Communion, many drew gasps of surprise. I said then, God is a God of surprises. Let me now speak of the God of surprises in the context of Africa as we begin our descent. Pliny, a Roman scholar and scientist, said of Africa, "There's always something new out of Africa," meaning Africa never ceases to surprise. A word of caution is apt when we talk of Africa. Richard Dowden, in his book, Africa, writes, "Every time you say Africa is, the words crumble and break. Just as you think you have nailed down a certainty, a defining characteristic, you'll find the opposite truth in other places. Africa is full of surprises." Has it ever crossed your mind that we are all Africans? This is not a trick question. 12 years ago, a journal, Cell, published results of DNA testing on Neanderthal man in an attempt to prove that he was an evolutionary dead end. The tests showed a large difference between modern man and the Neanderthals. The team leader, Dr. Savet Pabo of the University of Munich, said that while Neanderthals were evolving in Europe, modern man first appeared in Africa, migrating to Europe and displacing the Neanderthals. The bottom line, Dr. Pabo stated, was that we are all Africans. It was a finding of major importance. 5 months ago at Heathrow Airport, I picked up The Economist, Intelligent Life, with the headline, "We are all African now. Every one of us has African ancestors." I think you may be related to me. Well, thinking about that, I recall Mara Motswe, that wise woman of traditional build, pondering about humanity in the #1 ladies detective agency. She muses, "God put us on this earth. We were all Africans then, in the beginning, because man started in Kenya, as Dr. Leakey and his daddy have proved. So if you think carefully about it, we are all brothers and sisters." So, my fellow Africans, one more surprise from Africa concerning its Christian heritage dating back to the 1st century. Thomas Oden, in his book, How Africa Shaped the Christian Mind, enlightens us of the vital role Africa played in the formation of Christian culture throughout the world. North Africa gave theological leadership to the Western Church. The church fathers, Tertullian, Origen, Cyprian, and Augustine, were pillars of the African church and the West. There is a mistaken notion that Christianity is foreign to Africa and was brought there by white missionaries 300 and 400 years ago, when in fact it has been part of Africa's heritage for centuries. We forget that much of Christian history occurred in Africa. And if you remove Africa out of the Bible and Christian memory, then you remove many important stories of salvation history. It is the story of the children of Abraham in Africa. It is the story of Joseph in Africa. It is the story of Moses in Africa. It is the story of Mary, Joseph, and Jesus as refugees in Africa. They didn't need visas. It is the story of Simon of Cyrene, an African who carried our Lord Jesus Christ's cross. In this legacy, we find Cyprian's brilliant teaching on the unity of the church, the privilege and autonomy of each church embodied in each local bishop. Cyprian, at the Seventh Council of Carthage, held to deliberate a baptismal controversy, reminded his brother bishops of the sovereign independence of each bishop in his church. He insisted that in the matter under discussion, liberty should be respected. One should refrain from passing judgment on those who think in a different manner. And the differences should not lead to the breaking of communion. Cyprian said, I like this African, it but remains that each of us should, in regard to this same matter, bring forward his opinion, judging no one, nor depriving anyone of the right of communion if he should think differently. For neither does any one of us set himself up as a bishop, nor by tyranny and terror does anyone compel his colleague to the necessity of obedience, since every bishop has his own free will to the unrestrained exercise of his liberty and power, so that neither can he be judged by another, nor is he himself able to judge another. Rather, let us all await the judgment of our Lord Jesus Christ, the one and only one who has both the power of setting us over the governing of his church and of judging our conduct in that capacity. Cyprian believed the concordia, or moral unity, communion of the bishops, was vital for the manifestation of the one church. The emphasis is on the notion of the church, which is one, yet multiple. Each local church springs from the Lord and is bestowed with all the necessary means of bearing witness to the Lord in its context. This great African bishop's teaching is valid today as it was in the first century. He thought in the spirit of unity in diversity, so pertinent to the Anglican communion today. The God of wonder, grace, and surprises is about a transforming friendship that makes us whole. We are transformed in the wonder of the knowledge that divinity is encrypted in us. We are transformed in the grace that, though we are all a total mess, God redeems us. We are transformed in the surprising thought that God surprises us in his love and mercy. Here, I would have ended, but it is a long way from Gaborone, Botswana to New Haven, Connecticut. So I conclude, with your permission, Dean, with this bonus reflection of my perception of Anglicanism. There is a lovely jazz ballad entitled So Many Stars, which I think should be the anthem of the Anglican Communion. The lyrics are, the dawn is filled with dreams, so many dreams. Which one is mine? One must be right for me. Which dream of all the dreams when there's a dream for every star? And there are so many stars. The singer is seeking for the right tone, the one truth in a complex world. How can I tell out of so many stars? We are all seekers in life for the right dream, purpose, or belief. It's very difficult to know when there are so many stars to choose from. You feel the anxiety in the questions. The questions echo in the Anglican Communion, but they are the wrong questions. It is not about choosing one thing, but rather, how can we welcome and appreciate what diversity offers us? This is what life offers us. There's so many stars. The psalmist says of God, he counts the number of stars and calls them all by name. We cannot narrow everything in our lives to a single dream or star or name, but rather allow our lives to be blessed by the diversity of life. God made life deliberately diverse. The dreams and stars are there to enrich and enhance us. As we appreciate each star we encounter and know its name, we grow star by star, name by name. The Anglican Communion's life lies in appreciating unity in diversity, as does the world. Great minds have expressed its significance in church and politics. I think of the late Archbishop of Canterbury, Robert Runcie. In 1981, in a foreword to a book entitled Grow or Die, he said, "No single form of Christian experience, conviction, or organization is going to prevail over others. Conservative and radical, contemplative and activist, pietist and social reformer, all must learn to live together. They may and should see much to criticize in their own and others' position. The critical faculty must not be lost. Reverence for truth must still be paramount. But all must learn to live together. For in religion, as in all else, the same things do not appeal to everybody." I think of President John F. Kennedy politically voicing the same truth in 1962 in his address at the University of California, Berkeley. "The wave of the future," he said, "is not the conquest of the world by a single dogmatic creed, but the liberation of the diverse energies. Thinking unity in diversity is to think multidimensionally." Aaron Lev Stallman, in his book, The Illuminated Soul, says, "New frontiers stand continually before us if we are wise enough to see them. We pass through one, and suddenly another approaches. What we spend our lives learning will always be nothing in comparison with what remains to be discovered." Multidimensional thinking resists the know-it-all mentality, which takes simplistic view of life by reducing it to one-dimensional level devoid of new frontiers. Maya Angelou, in her book Wouldn't Take Nothing for My Journey Now, has a reflection entitled Passports to Understanding, which imparts wisdom on how we can get out of our one-dimensional worlds. She encourages us to encounter other worlds, whether it be languages, cultures, philosophies. These encounters broaden our horizon. We come to realize that all peoples cry, laugh, eat, worry, and die. In the experience of these new encounters, it can introduce the idea that if we try to understand each other, we may even become friends. The problem in the debate on sexuality in the Anglican Communion is that some bishops view the church and the world through one-dimensional lens. Bishops are trapped in their cultural and theological worlds. The American Episcopalian dissident bishops, in alliance with some African bishops, have desperately tried to reshape Anglicanism to a single point of view, especially in regard to the interpretation of Scripture. Anglicanism is multidimensional. This means a deep respect for the identity of that which is perceived. Eleanor Roosevelt spoke about approaching each person you meet with a spirit of adventure, trying to discover what they are thinking and feeling, to understand how, as far as you can, the background from which they come, the soil in which their roots have grown, the customs and beliefs and ideas which have shaped their thinking. If you care enough to make the effort, you can establish relationship with people who are outside your own orbit. Anglicanism is allergic to the single point of view which seeks to force the subject or object into the restrictive patterns of one's own purpose, which has characterized the sexuality debate as we callously label each other. It is misleading to label all African bishops as conservative, as it is to label all American bishops as liberals. The myth of African bishops being of one mind has been a useful barge pole or cannon fodder in the internal internecine feud within the Episcopal Church. Regrettably, some African bishops have allowed themselves to be used in a proxy war instead of being mediators and reconcilers. The media see only a battle between two bitter opponents, the conservative African bishops and liberal Western bishops. They have not been disappointed with some African archbishops, like ecclesiastical long-range ballistic missiles, launching themselves from the African continent to land and interfere in provinces and dioceses in the Episcopal Church. Yet, the reality is that the majority of African Anglicans and bishops are not in the least bothered about what is going on. This controversy, and I know that it may come as a surprise to many, has really been a one-sided fight. The dissident bishops from America have used Africa as a trampoline on which to bounce their views, and some ambitious priests from outside Africa have used African bishops as stepping stones to become bishops. We are not amused in the slightest. There are three levels of awareness to this debate in Africa. The first level is with the primates. At this level, pronouncements have been made by some African primates purporting to speak on behalf of their provinces, yet without consulting their fellow bishops, clergy, and laity. A very, very careful scrutiny of these pronouncements reveals that many have been scripted in America and England and read with African accents. The second level is with the bishops and clergy. Here, most bishops have a casual awareness of the debate, augmented by the barked orders of some of their primates instructing them what to do. But the clergy are not fully in the loop. The third level is laity, mostly, totally ignorant of what's going on. Apart from the press coverage in the West, the gay issue is not a preoccupation of the poor. And by concentrating on the gay and lesbian debate at the expense of other, more immediate pressing issues such as poverty, malnutrition, drought, HIV/AIDS, malaria, corruption, bad governance, the environment, the integrity of people outside the Northern Hemisphere is demeaned. Africa does not want the sexuality debate imposed on it as a priority agenda. Our priority is about basic survival. In the words of a Swahili proverb, An empty stomach has no ears to hear with. The astute Africans recognize a relentless attempt to hijack the Anglican communion with this agenda in what is nothing more than a power struggle. There are people who have made a career out of it. The rewards are good. Like smart lawyers, they will prolong this matter on technicalities as long as they can. Jogonkulu Ndungane, the former Archbishop of Cape Town, rightly observed that homosexuality is not the issue at stake. It is emblematic of or even a smokescreen for a far more important principle which the political struggles of today's globalizing world are echoing. That is whether one worldview, one political perspective, one theological stance overrules, is right, can assert dominance and render all other standpoints inferior and illegitimate. The alternative is the very nature of Anglicanism, where none of us has the monopoly on knowledge and understanding. I am almost finished. Anglicanism is rooted in the via media with its pillars of scripture, reason, and tradition. The via media recognizes and grapples with the untidiness of life, eschewing neat and tidy theological understanding of life. Christianity has never been a tidy religion. It has always been marked by tensions. The tensions go back to the apostles Peter and Paul. Peter stressed the Jewish followers of Jesus as the heart of the new Christian religion and looked to tradition and unity. Paul likewise looked to tradition, enriching it with the universality of Christianity and looking outwards to others and to change. When the two confronted each other at the Council of Jerusalem, neither position won. Since then, the two Petrine and Pauline aspects of the church have reflected both the traditional and prophetic. The early church fathers were wise to decide that Peter and Paul share a feast day, and by so doing, symbolized that tradition and prophecy are always in a continuing dialogue. Anglicanism exists within tensions. We need reminding to see afresh the via media, the time-honored respect for varied opinions, and pray for the grace of mutual tolerance and respect for each other. I believe in the future of Anglican communion because it is not about us, it is about God. We should be asking, what does God think about this mess? We should understand that it's God who calls us into being. We are guests at the Lord's table. God determines the menu. What is on this menu of transformation? The main course is in Ephesians, that Christ may dwell in our hearts by faith, that we, being rooted and grounded in love, may be able to comprehend with all the saints what is the breadth, the length, and depth, and height, and to know the love of Christ which passeth knowledge, that we might be filled with the fullness of God. The other important item on the menu I'll leave with you is that we are all children of God, and it does not yet appear what we shall be, but we know when he appears, we shall be like him. Our faith is a journey of transformation. In the wisdom of the Reverend Louis Pitt, we must keep reminding ourselves that we are all earthen vessels. Our power lies not in ourselves, but in God. The Anglican communion must always drag itself before God and say, here we are, what a mess. And allow the Spirit to cleanse us and lead us to new frontiers of truth and growth. The Spirit of God is the precious treasure that Anglicanism contains. In this spirit, the communion will grow and continue because the Windsor Commission recognized that there exists within the Anglican communion a large, very large constituency of faithful members who are bemused and bewildered by the intensity of the opposing views on issues of sexuality. This group embraces worshippers who yearn for expressions of communion which will provide stability and encouragement for their pilgrimage. Their voices have been eclipsed by the intensity of sounds on opposing sides of the debate. In Africa, this group is in the majority, and therefore, I repeat, therefore, no African province will initiate a breakup of the Anglican communion. The Council of Anglican Provinces in Africa is very clear. Addressing Africa's pressing issues is where the mission of the Church lies. The homosexuality issue is minor in the light of the life and death issues which Africa has to grapple with each day. I personally think the proposed Anglican covenant is not the panacea to our present problems, born out of fear of the other. You cannot legislate love, forgiveness, joy, wonder, grace, and surprises. These are gifts of the Spirit, which grow in our personal lives through the practice of the presence of God. God calls us to rededicate ourselves to the ancient covenant. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind, and you shall love your neighbor as yourself. This is the covenant of grace which endures forever and casts out all fear. Here we realize we are called to love and not judge. Screwtape's message to the graduates to be posted to tempter ships on earth was the destruction of individuals. Our message is the affirmation of individuals by their transformation, what the Orthodox call theosis. We are given life to be one with God. This is the key for a better world. The other key is this: African tale. Once upon a time in an African forest, a blind rabbit and a blind snake met. And since they could not make out who the other was, they decided that they would feel each other and say who they were. So the snake went first and began to touch the rabbit and said, "You are furry, you have long ears, you have a stubby tail. You are a rabbit." And the rabbit jumped up enthusiastically and said, "Yes, yes, yes, yes." Then the rabbit proceeded to explore the snake and said, "You are rather long and cold-blooded. You have beady eyes. You have a forked tongue. You are slithery. And you have no means of self-locomotion. You are a consultant." The moral of the tale: get acquainted. As leaders in church and world, your mission is to create a happy, safe, caring, and loving world. We can do so, for example, by encouraging companion links amongst dioceses different from each other in Africa, America, and the United Kingdom, clergy working in different cultural settings from their own, exchange of visits by laity, and student placements. We can also create opportunities for deeper understanding and appreciation of one another through critical and creative dialogue. And along the way, we can begin to see things not from a point of view, but points of view, as God does. We may get it wrong occasionally, but we must work at it as brothers and sisters in God. We must work at it. There's plenty of work for love to do, you know. We are more than the labels we tag ourselves with: straight, gay, liberal, conservative, moderate, Anglo-Catholic, evangelical, traditionalist, Africans, Americans, Asians, Latinos, Europeans. We are one in Christ. This is our identity. In God's kingdom, everyone is welcome and has a seat at the table. Archbishop Akinola sitting next to Bishop Jean Robinson. For such is the kingdom of the God of wonder, grace, and surprises.